This is Atomic Biscuits, and I'm your host, BACFA. This is Atomic Biscuits 2024-0818 Conversation Extremis. We're going to start over there at Breitbart.com. Donald Trump endorses ending Department of Education, empowering states in X Spaces interview. Former President Donald Trump wants to end the Department of Education and empower states if he is reelected, he said during an X Spaces interview with Elon Musk on Monday. The 45th president pointed out that U.S. education scores are tumbling compared to other developed countries, even though the United States spends more per pupil than any other country in the world. I want to close the Department of Education, move education back to the states, Trump told Musk, Tesla CEO and ex-Twitter owner. There's a link here for the full interview. Trump contended that if states were allowed sole control of their own educational systems, it would decrease costs while driving up healthy competition between the states. But if you move education back to the 50 states, you'll have some that won't do well, but they'll actually be forced to do better because it'll be a pretty bad situation, he said. But if you think about it, you'll have some of these states, I bet you'd have 30, 35 states, where education will be much better. And you know what? It'll cost less than half what it is in Washington. And these people don't care about the students in these faraway states. It would be unbelievable, he emphasized. Musk told Trump he was making a good point and appeared to agree that such a policy would enable Americans to more easily choose where they live and where they could have better opportunities. Yeah, I think you're making a good point in that if each individual state has to compete against other states, then people will naturally move to states where it's better, Musk said. That's right, Trump replied. Trump has previously called for the Department of Education to be ended or scaled back. In 2016, he said the department can largely be eliminated. Betsy DeVos, who served as the U.S. Secretary of Education under Trump, has also called for the abolishment of the Department of Education. Representative Thomas Massie, Republican from Kentucky, praised Trump's endorsement of ending the Department of Education in a post to X on Tuesday and renewed his call to pass his one-sentence bill, H.R. 899, which would terminate the department. Quote, I have reintroduced this bill each Congress, and I have taken care that it is always designated as H.R. 899. Many people like that my bill is only one sentence long. No beating around the bush. Perhaps my colleagues can take time to read it, Massie said in part. In closing, the creation of the U.S. Department of Education was a failed re-election ploy of Jimmy Carter, but now we're stuck with what amounts to a national school board composed of 4,000 bureaucrats, Massie continued. Let's empower teachers and parents by passing H.R. 899 to end the Department of Education. That, again, is over at Breitbart.com. Over at the New York Post, nypost.com, Representative Jim Banks probes Tim Walz's obvious security risk in dozen trips to China while serving in National Guard. Representative Jim Banks is demanding answers from the Pentagon about the obvious security risk Democrat vice presidential pick Tim Walz posed to the U.S. due to at least a dozen trips he took to China while serving in the National Guard, according to a letter exclusively obtained by the Post. Banks, a Republican from Indiana, wrote to Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin on Tuesday asking about the risks of hostile foreign intelligence activity the Minnesota governor faced, since Walz almost certainly had a security clearance as a senior-ranking guardsman when traveling to China between 1989 and 2005. Any individual traveling dozens of times to an adversary nation in a personal capacity while having access to classified information poses an obvious security risk, the Indiana Republican said. I'm therefore concerned that Governor Walz may have failed to comply with foreign travel reporting requirements during these trips to China, despite his duty as a security clearance holder to protect our national security, he added. U.S. service members are always ordered to report on such trips, but especially so when dealing with an adversarial nation, according to Banks, and often are required to complete debriefing questionnaires upon their return to note any potentially suspicious interaction that occurred. Brian J. Kavanaugh, a former National Security Council senior director in the Trump White House, told the Post that such security measures were designed to mitigate the risk of foreign intelligence activities and ensure that individuals are aware of potential threats. Regarding the case of Governor Tim Walz's visits to China while he served in the Army National Guard, the security risks would depend on several factors, including the nature of his interactions, the level of classified information he had access to, and his compliance with reporting requirements, Kavanaugh said. If Governor Walz failed to report foreign travel or take action on any mitigation measures, the risks of him jeopardizing national security are very real, especially given his tenor and tone towards his time in China, he assessed. Kavanaugh also pointed to Department of Defense directives governing the procedures for reporting on foreign travel, as well as other relevant federal laws, such as the Foreign Agents Registration Act, or FARA. These laws and orders mandate the protection of classified information and outline the responsibilities of clearance holders, including the requirement to report foreign contacts and travel that might pose a risk to national security, he said. Walz, 60, who speaks Mandarin, first visited China in 1989 as a college graduate working as an American history and English instructor for the World Teach program in Foshan in southern China. No matter how long I live, I will never be treated that well again, he recalled in 1990. They gave me more gifts than I could bring home. It was an excellent experience. 3 years later, Walz returned with his wife, Gwen, as part of an exchange program with Beijing that the couple helped set up for high school students. The couple went on many more trips, with Walz claiming to have personally gone on as many as 30 excursions to China. I've lived in China, and as I've said, I've been there about 30 times, Walz told AgriPulse in 2016. I don't fall into the category that China necessarily needs to be an adversarial relationship. I totally disagree. An interview of one of his former colleagues in the Chinese language outlet Initium Media noted that Walz had been treated like royalty while he was there, and his wife revealed that he intentionally chose their wedding date to coincide with the 5th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre of 1989. He wanted to have a date he'll always remember, said Gwen Walz, according to a report in The Guardian. Many of those trips took place during his 24-year career as a member of a field artillery regiment in the Army National Guard, where he rose through the ranks to eventually become a command sergeant major. According to Banks, a U.S. Navy Reserve officer who served in Afghanistan, Walz's naive optimism was easily open to exploitation by the Chinese Communist Party. Walz chose to have his honeymoon in China and even bizarrely planned his wedding date to coincide with the 5th anniversary of the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre, he noted to Austin, later adding that the schoolteacher and later U.S. congressman was also willing to repeatedly accept gifts. Banks is requesting that Austin hand over by August 20th information about the precise number of trips Walz took to China, what level of security clearance he held and for how long, and whether he attended foreign intelligence briefings and complied with reporting requirements. The letter comes on the heels of attacks against Walz from members of his former battalion and congressional Republicans, many of whom have accused him of stolen valor after he abandoned troops under his leadership before deployment to the Iraq War. Democrat presidential nominee Kamala Harris made clear in announcing she tapped Walz to be her running mate that She was proud of his past roles as a teacher and a veteran who has delivered for working families like his. Neither the Pentagon nor representatives for the Harris-Walz campaign immediately responded to a request for comment. This story and the links are over at the New York Post, that's nypost.com. Over at the Washington Free Beacon, freebeacon.com, Muslim Dem delegate says Harris can't win without appeasing anti-Israel voters with arms embargo. A Minnesota Muslim Democrat delegate told Politico Tuesday that her party's presidential nominee, Kamala Harris, cannot win the White House without appeasing anti-Israel voters and promising an arms embargo on Israel. If we do not have a ceasefire and arms embargo promise from Vice President Harris come November, I am sure that we will lose, Minnesota delegate Asma Muhammad told Politico. Muhammad is one of 30 uncommitted delegates expected to be at the Democrat National Convention who represent a Democrat voter coalition upset over President Joe Biden's support for Israel in its war against Hamas terrorists. The coalition is pressuring Harris to demand a ceasefire in the region and suspend military aid to Israel, the United States' top ally. We cannot win against Donald Trump if we don't have all of the uncommitted voters and all the people who are truly on the fence right now, Muhammad said. Since Harris launched her bid for the White House, she has leaned into her party's progressive left wing, positioning herself as even more critical of Israel than Biden. Last week, her national security advisor had to walk back the vice president's statement to leaders of a Michigan anti-Israel group that she is open to discussing an arms embargo on the Jewish state. Muhammad, a lead organizer for Uncommitted Minnesota, was particularly excited that Harris tapped her state's governor, Tim Walz, to run for vice president, saying it's possible that her coalition can work through Walz to get to Harris. We're really relieved that Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro wasn't the pick. He's a former Israel Defense Forces volunteer, Muhammad said. I've worked with Governor Walz to pass some really good legislation. So to me, Walz is a movable target. I think that we can elicit some more wins from him. In Minnesota's Democrat primary, more than 40,000 Minnesotan voters cast protest ballots against Biden, sending 11 uncommitted delegates from the state to the convention. Walz praised the uncommitted members as civically engaged following the primary election. Walz also called the Israel-Hamas war intolerable. You know, it's only dirty pool when one side does it. GatewayPundit.com had this brief notation. Wow. Dirty Harris campaign edits news headlines with Google search ads to make it appear major news outlets are on her side without their knowledge. And I'll leave the link to this and all the stories I cover on Atomic Biscuits out on the free speech platform Gab at BACFA. You really have to see it to believe it. There's some visual evidence here of what the headline reads, like who is Kamala Harris, and then the sponsored summary is something different altogether. So the promotional campaign is well underway. I don't watch a lot of television, but I was sick last weekend and had some streaming stuff on, and I could not believe how many inserts we got of Kamala's cackling laugh with the same ads over and over and over. They've really spent a lot of money, and I'm sure there's some contributions from the Silicon Valley group to make sure her face and cackle are everywhere. The story reads, the Harris campaign is editing news headlines with Google search ads to make it appear major news outlets such as Reuters, CBS News, CNN, NPR, and AP, the Associated Press, are on her side. While these major news outlets are shilling for Harris, her campaign edited the news headlines without the outlet's consent or knowledge. The ads say sponsored, but the outlets did not publish the text. The favorable headlines were written by the Harris campaign. CNN, NPR, and other outlets told Axios they were unaware of the ads. Google says the Harris campaign has not violated their policies because the ads are labeled sponsored. Axios reported, the Harris campaign has been editing news headlines and descriptions within Google search ads that make it appear as if The Guardian, Reuters, CBS News, and other major publishers are on her side, Axios has found. Why it matters? It's a common practice in the commercial advertising world that doesn't violate Google's policies, but the ads mimic real news results from search closely enough that they have news outlets caught off guard. According to Google's Ad Transparency Center, the Trump campaign isn't running these types of ads, but this technique has been used by campaigns before. The ads say they are sponsored, but it's not immediately clear that the text that accompanies real news links is written by the campaigns and not by the media publication itself. What they're saying: while we understand why an organization might wish to align itself with the Guardian's trusted brand, we need to ensure it is being used appropriately and with our permission. We'll be reaching out to Google for more information about this practice, a Guardian spokesperson said. Spokespeople for brands such as CNN, USA Today, and NPR, whose links appeared in Harris for President ads, said they were unaware their brand was being featured in this way. Again, this is over at thegatewaypundit.com.
The digital ID legislation has not come into effect yet. It doesn't come into effect until the 1st of December this year. The law is very clear that there must be alternate ways provided for the community to engage with government. That has been made very clear across government. And I would say if you want to forward me that constituent, I would be issue, even if it's de-identified, I'd be very happy to look at it. But we have been very clear. It is a voluntary system, it is a safe system, it is a secure system, and it's simply a means of verifying yourself in a way that gives you control of your own documentation.
It's in the air. yet we can't touch it, but it is here, and we love it, for life is pure, and it is special. I want more precious metal. It's not over, and it's not awful, for this is life, and it's immortal.
My starting point when it comes to the consideration of any issue relating to free speech is my passionate belief that the second most precious thing in life is the right to express yourself freely. The most precious thing in life, I think, is food in your mouth, and the third most precious is a roof over your head. But a fixture for me in the number 2 slot is free expression, just below the need to sustain life itself. That is because I have enjoyed free expression in this country all my professional life and fully expect to continue to do so. Personally, I suspect highly unlikely to be arrested for whatever laws exist to contain free expression because of the undoubtedly privileged position that is afforded to those of a high public profile. So my concerns are less for myself and more for those more vulnerable because of their lower profile. Like the man arrested in Oxford for calling a police horse gay, or the teenager arrested for calling the Church of Scientology a cult, or the cafe owner arrested for displaying passages from the Bible on a TV screen. When I heard of some of these more ludicrous offences and charges, I remembered that I had been here before in a fictional context. I once did a show called Not the 9 O'Clock News some years ago, and we did a sketch where Griff Rhys-Jones played Constable Savage, a manifestly racist police officer to whom I, as his station commander, is giving a dressing down for arresting a black man on a whole string of ridiculous, trumped-up and ludicrous charges. The charges for which Constable Savage arrested Mr. Winston Kadogo of 55 Mercer Road were these: walking on the cracks in the pavement, walking in a loud shirt in a built-up area during the hours of darkness, and one of my favorites, walking around all over the place. He was also arrested for urinating in a public convenience and looking at me in a funny way. Who would have thought that we would end up with a law that would allow life to imitate art so exactly? I read somewhere a defender of the status quo claiming that the fact that the gay horse case was dropped after the arrested man refused to pay the fine, and that the Scientology case was also dropped at some point during the court process, was proof that the law was working well, ignoring the fact that the only reason these cases were dropped was because of the publicity that they had attracted. The police sensed that ridicule was just around the corner and withdrew their actions. But what about the thousands of other cases that did not enjoy the oxygen of publicity, that weren't quite ludicrous enough to attract media attention? Even for those actions that were withdrawn, people were arrested, questioned, taken to court, and then released. That isn't a law working properly. That is censoriousness of the most intimidating kind, guaranteed to have, as Lord Deere says, a chilling effect on free expression and free protest. Parliament's Joint Committee on Human Rights summarised, as you may know, this whole issue very well by saying, while arresting a protester for using threatening or abusive speech may, depending on the circumstances, be a proportionate response, we do not think that language or behaviour that is merely insulting should ever be criminalised in this way. The clear problem with the outlawing of insult is that too many things can be interpreted as such. Criticism is easily construed as insult by certain parties. Ridicule easily construed as insult. Sarcasm, unfavourable comparison, merely stating an alternative point of view to the orthodoxy can be interpreted as insult. And because so many things can be interpreted as insult, it is hardly surprising that so many things have been, as the examples I talked about earlier show. Although the law under discussion has been on the statute book for over 25 years, it is indicative of a culture that has taken hold of the programs of successive governments, that with the reasonable and well-intentioned ambition to contain obnoxious elements in society, has created a society of an extraordinarily authoritarian and controlling nature. That is what you might call the new intolerance, a new but intense desire to gag uncomfortable voices of dissent. I am not intolerant, say many people, say many softly spoken, highly educated, liberal-minded people. I'm only intolerant of intolerance. And people tend to nod sagely and say, oh yes, wise words, wise words. And yet if you think about this supposedly inarguable statement for longer than 5 seconds, you realize that all it is advocating is the replacement of one kind of intolerance with another, which to me doesn't represent any kind of progress at all. Underlying prejudices, injustices, or resentments are not addressed by arresting people. They are addressed by the issues being aired, argued, and dealt with, preferably outside the legal process. For me, the best way to increase society's resistance to insulting or offensive speech is to allow a lot more of it. As with childhood diseases, you can better resist those germs to which you have been exposed. We need to build our immunity to taking offence so that we can deal with the issues that perfectly justified criticism can raise. Our priority should be to deal with the message, not the messenger. As President Obama said in an address to the United Nations only a month or so ago, laudable efforts to restrict speech can become a tool to silence critics or oppress minorities. The strongest weapon against hateful speech is not repression, it is more speech. And that's the essence of my thesis, more speech. If we want a robust society, we need more robust dialogue, and that must include the right to insult or to offend. And even if, as Lord Deere says, the freedom to be inoffensive is no freedom at all. The repeal of this word in this clause will be only a small step, but it will, I hope, be a critical one in what should be a longer-term project to pause and slowly rewind a creeping culture of censoriousness. It is a small skirmish in the battle, in my opinion, to deal with what Sir Salman Rushdie refers to as the outrage industry. self-appointed arbiters of the public good, encouraging media-stoked outrage to which the police feel under terrible pressure to react. A newspaper rings up Scotland Yard. Someone has said something slightly insulting on Twitter about someone who we think a national treasure. What are you going to do about it? And the police panic and they scrabble around and then grasp the most inappropriate lifeline of all, Section 5 of the Public Order Act, that thing where you can arrest anybody for saying anything that might be construed by anyone else as insulting. You know, they don't seem to need a real victim. They need only to make the judgment that somebody could have been offended if they had heard or read what has been said, the most ludicrous degree of latitude. The storms that surround Twitter and Facebook comment have raised some fascinating issues about free speech, which we haven't really yet come to terms with. Firstly, that we all have to take responsibility for what we say, which is quite a good lesson to learn. But secondly, we've learned how appallingly prickly and intolerant society has become of even the mildest adverse comment. The law should not be aiding and abetting this new intolerance. Free speech can only suffer if the law prevents us from dealing with its consequences. I offer my wholehearted support to the Reform Section 5 campaign. Thank you very much.
To be in the tank with one of the candidates during election year seems like the thing that dreams are made of when it comes to mainstream outlets. This story over at thefederalist.com, the New York Times praises Democrats' immigration policies for reshaping the electorate. The New York Times published a piece on Monday detailing how new citizens are eager to vote in the upcoming election, praising that a reduction in the wait time for applications to be processed means the electorate is being reshaped before a pivotal election. The surge in naturalization efficiency isn't just about clearing backlogs, it's potentially reshaping the electorate, merely months before a pivotal election. Boundless Chief Executive Zhao Wang told the Times. Every citizenship application could be a vote that decides Senate seats or even the presidency. Boundless is a company that uses government data to analyze immigration trends and that offers services to immigrants who seek professional help in navigating the application process, according to the Times. While the article doesn't explicitly state whether the aforementioned individuals being processed came to the United States legally or illegally, the article acknowledges that, although naturalizing lawful residents has had broad bipartisan support, there has been long partisan disagreement over how to tackle illegal immigration and overhaul the nation's immigration laws. Citizenship has become more politicized in recent years, the article claims. While not all asylum seekers enter the country illegally, individuals who enter the country illegally are still permitted to later apply for asylum. All asylees are eligible to apply for permanent resident status 1 year after receiving the grant, and individuals with permanent resident status are then eventually eligible for citizenship. The Times article laments how the Trump administration, intent on curbing legal immigration, conducted lengthier reviews of naturalization applications and how the processing time roughly doubled in about 10 months during Mr. Trump's tenure. The bottleneck prevented some 300,000 prospective citizens from naturalizing in time to vote in the 2020 election, according to estimates by Boundless, the Times decried, before explaining that there are approximately 9 million green card holders who are eligible for citizenship, many of which have historically leaned Democratic. One of the 4 states with the largest number of immigrants who qualify for citizenship includes Florida, a traditionally red state whose electoral votes make the state a must-win for Republicans. Florida has more registered Republicans than it does Democrats by a margin of more than 1 million, according to the Orlando Sentinel. There are an estimated 772,000 illegal immigrants currently residing in Florida, according to the Migration Policy Institute. We know our immigration system is broken, and we know what it takes to fix it. Comprehensive reform that includes strong border security and an earned pathway to citizenship, Vice President Kamala Harris said at a recent campaign event. If Democrats want to earn additional votes, they must give an entire electorate the ability to earn citizenship, and they know it. Again, this is over at Federalist.com. The Daily Signal, dailysignal.com, has Hunter Biden lied about lobbying for foreign agent to protect his father, prosecutor says. Hunter Biden received money from a foreign business magnate to influence U.S. policy and lied about the nature of his services for his father's sake, prosecutors stated in court after years of investigations. Hunter Biden received compensation from a foreign principal who was attempting to influence U.S. policy and public opinion, prosecutors say in documents filed last week in the trial of the president's son over $1.4 million in unpaid taxes. Yet the younger Biden failed to register as a lobbyist for a foreign power to spare his father political embarrassment, falsely labeling his business as real estate management advice. In 2015, Romanian real estate tycoon Gabriel Popoviciu faced bribery charges in his native land. Popoviciu hired Hunter Biden, then son of sitting Vice President Joe Biden, to prompt the Obama-Biden administration to investigate the Romanian criminal investigation into Gabriel Popoviciu and therefore cause an end to the investigation of Gabriel Popoviciu in Romania, stated court filings from special counsel David Weiss. At the time, the senior Biden handled the Eastern European portfolio for the Obama administration. Since he was attempting to change U.S. policy toward the Romanian government, Hunter Biden should have registered with the United States government as the agent of a foreign citizen under the terms of the Foreign Agents Registration Act, or FARA. Yet the younger Biden and his business associate were concerned that lobbying work might cause political ramifications for the defendant's father, Joe Biden, the court filing said. Instead, their business documents claimed Popoviciu, who prosecutors refer to as GP in court documents, hired Biden to provide management services to real estate properties in Romania. That was not actually what GP was paying for, charged Weiss, who was named special counsel in the case by Attorney General Merrick Garland, himself appointed by Biden. In all, Popoviciu paid the firm Robinson Walker LLC, run by Rob Walker, just over $3.1 million, which distributed approximately one-third of the proceeds each to Hunter Biden, Walker, and James Gilliar. Payments began on November 5, 2015, as Popoviciu deposited $179,836.86 into the business account. On November 14th, Hunter Biden met with Romania's ambassador to the United States and the next day traveled to Romania. Hunter would meet the ambassador again on March 26, 2016. The efforts may have included Joe Biden. In September 2015, then Vice President Biden welcomed Romanian President Klaus Iohannis to the White House to discuss corruption. Vice President welcomed President Iohannis' focus on anti-corruption efforts and the rule of law as a means to strengthen national security and promote greater investment and economic growth, stated a White House readout of the meeting. All in all, Popoviciu wired the first son and his associates $3,101,258 in a matter of months, according to court documents. Yet Hunter Biden performed almost no work in exchange for the millions of dollars he received from these entities, Weiss maintains in the documents. In 2017, Popoviciu received a 7-year sentence after being convicted in his bribery case. The details confirm the work done by Republican investigators for the House Oversight and Accountability Committee, which launched a comprehensive probe into the Biden family's finances. Those finances often are deeply enmeshed with foreign business deals carried out through the president's relatives. The Romanian transactions show evidence of influence peddling and a correlation between Biden family and their business associates' work, and then Vice President Biden's responsibilities while in office, stated the second memorandum produced by the House Committee on the Biden family's banking records. The Biden family and associates' activities in Romania bear clear indicia of a scheme to peddle influence from 2015 to 2017, the memo said. While Vice President Biden lectured Romania on corruption and ethics, Hunter Biden received, through Biden associate Rob Walker, over $1 million from a company controlled by a Romanian individual accused of corruption, Gabriel Popoviciu. Among the beneficiaries was Hallie Biden, Hunter's then-girlfriend and widow of his late brother Beau, whom House investigators say received $10,000. The Biden family is a syndicate, Representative Pat Fallon, Republican from Texas, said. The details also align with allegations that the Biden family sold proximity to the 46th president to foreigners. During his father's tenure as vice president, Hunter Biden also inked deals as an advisor to the Ukrainian energy firm Burisma and to China Energy Fund Committee, the CEFC. Weiss, who began investigating these charges during the Trump administration, allowed the statute of limitations to expire on many allegations. Yet the younger Biden's undisclosed Romanian lobbying presumably could still receive FARA scrutiny, National Review reporter James Lynch said. It does not appear that Weiss intends to bring such charges. The court filings say they reference Hunter Biden's dubious foreign lobbying only because it shows his state of mind and serves as evidence that the defendant's actions do not reflect someone with a diminished capacity, given that he agreed to attempt to influence U.S. public policy and receive millions of dollars. The president's son faces 3 felonies and 6 misdemeanors related to $1.4 million in unpaid taxes on $7 million in income. He has been convicted of 3 felony charges for lying on a federal gun application when he indicated he was not drug dependent so that he could purchase a handgun. This is again over at the Daily Signal, dailysignal.com. Let's pan the camera across the globe a little bit. Let's look at ArabNews.com out of Saudi Arabia. They have this article, How a Young Generation in Bangladesh Forced Out the Leader Who Ruled for Much of Their Lives. Janatul Prome hopes to leave Bangladesh to study more or possibly find a job after she finishes her university degree, frustrated by a system that she says doesn't reward merit and offers little opportunity for young people. We have very limited scope here, said the 21-year-old, who would have left sooner if her family had enough money to pay tuition at foreign universities for both her and her older brother at the same time. But recent events have given her hope that one day she might be able to return to a transformed Bangladesh. After 15 years in power, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina resigned and fled the country last week, chased out by young protesters, Prome among them, who said they are fed up with the way her increasingly autocratic rule has stifled dissent, favored the elite, and widened inequalities. Students initially poured into Bangladesh's streets in June demanding an end to rules that set aside up to 30% of government jobs for the descendants of veterans who fought the country's 1971 War of Independence from Pakistan. Protesters said that benefiting supporters of Hasina's Awami League, which led that struggle, and who already were a part of the elite. The quota and others for marginalized groups meant only 44% of civil service jobs were awarded based on merit. That such jobs lay at the center of the movement was no coincidence. They are some of the most stable and best paying in a country where the economy has boomed in recent years, but not created enough solid professional jobs for its well-educated middle class. And that Generation Z led this uprising was also not surprising, Young people like Prome are among the most frustrated with and affected by the lack of opportunity in Bangladesh, and at the same time they are not beholden to the old taboos and narratives that the quota system reflected. Their willingness to break with the past was clear when Hasina belittled their demands in mid-July, asking who, if not the freedom fighters, should be awarded government jobs. "Who will? The grandchildren of Razakars?" Hasina retorted, using a deeply offensive word that refers to those who collaborated with Pakistan to quell Bangladesh's independence struggle. But the student protesters wore the word as a badge of honor. They marched on Dhaka University's campus chanting, "Who are you? Who am I? Razakar. Who said this? The dictator." The following day, protesters were killed during clashes with security forces, only galvanizing the demonstrations, which widened into a broader uprising against Hasina's rule. Sabrina Karim, a professor at Cornell University who studies political violence and Bangladesh's military history, said that many of the protesters are so young they cannot remember a time before Hasina was prime minister. They were raised, like the generations before them, on stories of the independence struggle, with Hasina's family at the center. Her father, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, was the first leader of independent Bangladesh and was later assassinated in a military coup. But Karim said this narrative had much less meaning for the young protesters than it did for their grandparents. It doesn't resonate with them anymore as much as it did before, and they want something new, she said. For Nureen Sultana Toma, a 22-year-old student at Dhaka University, Hasina's equating of the student protesters with traitors made her realize the gulf between what the youth wanted and what the government could provide. She said that she had watched as Bangladesh was slowly lulled into becoming immune to inequities and people lost hope that things would ever get better. The country's longest-serving prime minister prided herself on boosting per capita income and transforming Bangladesh's economy into a global competitor. Fields turned into garment factories, and bumpy roads became winding highways. But Tomas said she saw the daily struggle of people trying to buy essentials or find work, and her demand for basic rights met with insults and violence. It could no longer be tolerated, Tomas said. This economic distress was keenly felt by Bangladesh's youth. 18 million young people in a country of 170 million are not working or in school, according to a researcher of Southeast Asia at Chatham House think tank. And after the pandemic, private sector jobs became even more scarce. Many young people try to study abroad or move overseas upon graduation in the hopes of finding decent work, decimating the middle class and resulting in brain drain. The class differences have widened, said Janantun Nahar Angkhan, a 28-year-old who works with non-profit in Dhaka, who joined the protests. Despite these problems, none of the protesters seemed to have truly believed that their movement would be able to dethrone Hasina. Rafiq Khan, 24, was on the streets preparing to join a protest when he heard Hasina had resigned and fled the country. He called home repeatedly to see if he could verify the news. He said that in the last days of the demonstrations, people from all classes, religions, and professions had joined the students on the streets. Now they hugged one another, while others just sat on the ground in disbelief. "I can't describe the joy that people felt that day," he said. Some of the euphoria is wearing off now as the enormity of the task ahead sinks in. Nobel laureate Muhammad Yunus became the interim leader Thursday, and he, along with a cabinet that includes 2 student protest leaders, will have to restore peace, build institutions, and prepare the country for fresh elections. The hope for most students is that the interim government gets time to repair Bangladesh's institutions while a new political party, not led by the old political dynasties, is formed. "If you asked me to vote in elections right now, I don't know who I'd vote for," said Khan. "We don't want to replace one dictatorship with another." The young people who took to the streets have often been described as the "I hate politics" generation. But Azahar Uddin Anik, a 26-year-old digital security specialist and recent graduate of Dhaka University, said that is a misnomer. They don't all hate politics, just the divisive politics in Bangladesh. And although he admits that the structural reforms the country now needs may be more difficult than removing the prime minister, he's hopeful for the first time in a while. My last experience is telling me that the impossible can happen, he said, and maybe it isn't too late. I'm going to wrap up with this story over at Mises.org. The Federal Reserve does not own gold. This is dated back on August 9th. Historically, as during the days of the classical gold standard, central banks maintained stocks of gold to facilitate the conversion of gold-backed national currencies. Those days are long gone, but in modern times, many central banks continue to own gold, and many central banks buy gold as part of their open market operations. For example, in his article last week, central banks purchased gold to offset their own money destruction. Daniel LaCalle writes, "The rising purchases of gold by central banks are an essential factor justifying the recent increase in demand for the precious metal. Central banks, especially in China and India, are trying to reduce their dependence on the dollar or the euro to diversify their reserves." The U.S.'s central bank, the Federal Reserve, is not among these banks buying gold. Obviously, the Fed has no interest in buying up gold as a means of de-dollarization. Moreover, the Fed is presently concerned with purchasing more dollar-denominated government debt to keep interest rates low on the federal government's huge deficits. But we must also note that another reason the Fed isn't buying gold is that the Fed hasn't been in the gold-owning business for a very long time. That is, the Fed has owned no gold since 1934, when the Fed handed over all its gold in exchange for gold certificates. This is how the Fed's Board of Governors summarizes the situation. The Federal Reserve does not own gold. The Gold Reserve Act of 1934 required the Federal Reserve System to transfer ownership of all of its gold to the Department of the Treasury. In exchange, the Secretary of the Treasury issued gold certificates to the Federal Reserve for the amount of gold transferred at the then applicable statutory price for gold held by the Treasury. Gold certificates are denominated in U.S. dollars. Their value is based on the statutory price for gold at the time the certificates are issued. Gold certificates do not give the Federal Reserve any right to redeem the certificates for gold. The statutory price of gold is set by law. It does not fluctuate with the market price of gold and has been constant at $42.02 or $42.22 per fine troy ounce since 1973. The book value of gold held by the Treasury is determined using the statutory price. Although the Federal Reserve does not own any gold, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York acts as the custodian of gold owned by account holders such as the U.S. government, foreign governments, other central banks, and official international organizations. No individuals or private sector entities are permitted to store gold in the vault of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York or at any Federal Reserve Bank. A small portion of the gold held by the U.S. Treasury, roughly $600 million in book value, about 5%, is held in custody for the Treasury by the Federal Reserve Banks as fiscal agents of the United States. The vast majority of this gold is located in the vault at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and a very small portion is on display in several Federal Reserve banks. The remaining 95% of U.S. Treasury gold, that's $10.4 billion in book value, is held in custody for the Treasury by the U.S. Mint. It is impossible to imagine that the Fed could start buying gold, but it's hard to see why the Fed would be motivated to do so. Moreover, given that the Fed's gold certificates have essentially no connection to actual market price for gold, changes in the price of gold have virtually no effect on the value of the Fed's assets. The only way gold prices would become relevant to the Fed's portfolio would be for the Congress to change the statutory price of gold, from $42.22. If the Fed wanted to actually take possession of that gold, Congress would also have to authorize the Fed to redeem its certificates in gold. That is all very unlikely, barring a very big change in the ideology of the ruling regime. Indeed, barring said ideological change, I suspect that in a true crisis, the Fed's extremely tenuous claim to owning its pre-1934 gold stockpile would be null and void altogether. If the Treasury finds itself truly strapped for cash, the Congress would only have to declare the Fed's gold certificates permanently unredeemable, or the Treasury could simply buy back the gold certificates at the ridiculously low statutory price. Then there would be no doubt about who owns that gold. The Treasury could then simply sell off all the gold to Wall Street banks in exchange for dollars that would go to luxury hotels for illegal immigrants or more bombs for the state of Israel. That's over at Mises.org. Well, I'd like to say things are going smoothly here in Georgia, but I've discovered that apparently one of the biggest drug busts ever happened this past week, with an enormous 1.2 tons of methamphetamine being delivered to the Atlanta farmers market under the cover of some celery. It's not a good time for open borders because all the cartels seem to be rolling their wares just as hard as they can. It's also a vigorous and violent season. We have all kinds of rumors of wars. We have all kinds of machinations. We have all kinds of people moving between Putin and between the West and between the Middle East and China and the United States, of course, ignoring the problems that are just at our doorstep in South America, in Mexico, and even Canada. Meanwhile, nation building continues all over the planet instead of building walls and reconstructing what we once had. It's going to take all of us. We're all going to have to pull together, foreign and domestic. We're going to have to focus on our family. We're going to have to focus on our community. We're going to have to focus on our nation and the laws and our constitutions. We're going to have to fight for freedom. Because, as Reagan said, it's never more than one generation from being lost. And we are the generation that have to hold the line until the next generation can do it. I have high hopes. I see good things in the generations that are coming. I think that they are seeing the fruits of the communist dictatorships. I think they're seeing the hardships that come when you vote socialists in who can't deliver on promises that never could. I want you to take care of yourself. I'm going to do something a little bit different next week, but hang in there. More Atomic Biscuits is on the way at the regular time and in the regular place. Have a wonderful week, everybody, from beautiful North Georgia. This is BACFA signing off. Have a good one.
Thanks for joining us for Atomic Biscuits. Tune in again next week for more news and music. Check out BACFA on Gab at BACFA, as well as Bitchute, Rumble, D-Live and Odysee. Check out LastScoutRadio.com for fun content. Listen to WBN 324 on radio stations around the world, on many streaming platforms, and World Broadcasting Network WBN 324.zil.